It's been a few weeks since I purchased two Blancpain Swatch collaboration watches. Today we're going to talk about my impressions of those watches wearing them over the past few weeks. We're going to talk about the good, we're going to talk about the bad, and we're going to talk about the ugly. We're also going to talk about whether or not this watch is worth the $400 price tag. We'll also get into how this watch actually broke. One of the watches actually broke during that time, and I'll talk about what broke and what I'm going to do about it. We'll talk about the overall quality of these watches and whether or not they can be used for daily wear. So let's flip the camera and take a look at the Antarctic and the Atlantic Swatch Blancpain collaboration. So it's been almost a month since I waited online for about 8 hours to buy a Blancpain Swatch collaboration watch. I actually purchased two, this one, the Antarctic, and the Atlantic on my wrist. The Atlantic is in blue. I'll show you these watches throughout this video on a bunch of different straps. I've been wearing them on these straps on and off, all different straps through this time because I really don't like the original straps, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the watches. We're going to talk about the straps that we're using here. These are Fathoms straps, very high quality straps that I highly recommend you check out. If you like this watch and you've purchased this watch and you want to upgrade the strap, definitely check out their website. I'll put a link down below. These are some of the sailcloth straps and of course their NATO straps, which I will show you in just a few minutes. But we're going to talk about the good, we're going to talk about the bad, and we're going to talk about the ugly. And through that, I'm going to talk about some quality control issues. I'm going to talk about some timing issues that I've experienced. And I'm also going to talk about what I like about these watches, what I'm actually surprised about. And finally, I'm going to talk about whether or not I think it's worth the money, what it should actually be priced at. And I'm going to tell you if I think the quality will hold up to daily wear. So I'm going to start with the good. The good on this watch, and there is a lot of good. There is a lot to like about these watches. Number one, I really like that this has a rotating bezel. The bezel on here is actually pretty good. It doesn't sound bad, the clicks are really nice, and it doesn't move. It looks like a 50 Fathoms. Part of that is the bezel. So you have this domed bezel with a plastic crystal in it, and I think it looks really good. And you are getting a plastic crystal in this bezel and a plastic crystal for the face. This is an acrylic crystal. It's a little bit thicker than what they used on the Moon Swatch, so you'll actually be able to buff some scratches out of this. However, this also does get an scratch resistant coating. I don't know what that means and how they do it on plastic, but it does have one. It does have a sapphire crystal on the case back, and the case back sapphire crystal is because they put it on a NATO strap and they don't want to put a plastic case back because obviously it will scratch pretty heavily with time as that NATO strap rubs against the case back. So it makes a lot of sense to me that they put a sapphire crystal on the case back and they put a plastic crystal on the front. The dials on these watches are phenomenal. They're a little bit busy because they put a lot of text on them, but they restrain themselves a little bit from the previous model, from the Moon Swatches, and they put less text on these watches. So you do have the Blancpain logo, whether or not it is a modern or a vintage, depends on the model that you're getting. And then it says Swatch below that. It also says Scuba because these are Scuba 50 Fathoms. So below Scuba, it says 50 Fathoms, and then of course 91 meters because these are 91 meters or 50 Fathoms water resistant. And they all have little design cues from existing models, of course, through the Blancpain 50 Fathoms lineup of watches, including vintage versions. So the Antarctic is a very good example of that because you get that water moisture indicator right at the bottom of the dial at 6 o'clock, which obviously is, I believe, non-functional, which looks awesome, and obviously a vintage callback, which I think looks really good, especially in the colors that they chose for that case. They also did a great job with the lume. The lume on here is excellent. You have a fully lumed bezel, all the indices and hands are lumed, including the second hand. You're getting a lot of lume on a watch that doesn't cost that much money. So it's $400, considering it is kind of expensive, but you are getting a lot of lume, which I really like. You don't get a screwed-in crown. You do get a snap-on case back, and that is something that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. You do get the System 51, that you can see through that sapphire crystal case back. It's actually not a bad looking movement. It's held together with one screw. You have 90 hours of power reserve. Of course, there are plastic parts, and a lot of people complain that you're not able to actually service this movement. There are watchmakers out there that will service this movement, and they just basically use another System 51 and replace the parts that they need to replace. The movement is cheap enough to just swap out, and I think a lot of people get really bent out of shape when that is what they hear, that you just have to swap out the movement. A lot of times when you go and service a watch, like a watch with a NH35 movement inside, they're just going to swap out the movement anyway, because the NH35 basically costs $30, $35, even less if you're Seiko. So it doesn't make any sense for someone to take it apart and put it back together when they can just swap it out. That's what a lot of manufacturers do, especially if they're using an NH product. That's just a fact. Swapping out the movement isn't really that big of a deal. So this means that you can service this watch. You can open up the case back and continue to use it. You could take the movement out, change the dial, change the hands. You can do whatever you need to do. So that's the good. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bad, and then I'm going to talk about the ugly. I'm not a huge fan of the straps. The straps that these came on are recycled material, so they're made using ocean reclaimed nets, which is great. I think that's a great thing, and they are soft. They feel really nice. I don't like that they have plastic hardware. I don't like the look and the feel of the plastic hardware, and when I have it on my wrist, I actually feel like it's not as secure. The other thing I don't like is the fact that they use bars. So these are the bars that actually go between the lugs. This little bar has a screw on one side and then a bar. On either side, there is a hex screw, and you need tools to actually remove these hex screws. So you need to have two of them, and these are 0.9 millimeter tools, hex screw tools basically, and you have to use them actually in the lugs at the same time and turn in different directions. What happens is they're easy to thread because they are actually very cheaply made, and I'm talking about the screws here that are between the bars, and also the bars themselves aren't of high quality. So I've actually already broken one, and I'll throw up a picture of it. I've actually broken off the head of one of the screws, and now it is garbage. So what I've done is, and now I've changed over to Artham straps basically immediately after getting these watches, and I put these on Artham straps, and I've used spring bars. So the spring bars that I've put in here, these are 22 millimeter lug span, I believe. So I think I put in 23 millimeter because the hole is large for those hex screws. You need a larger spring bar, and that's all that I did. That's it. And it works perfectly fine, and it looks great. And it's still, you know, it looks like you have drilled lugs. You can't tell that there's no hex screws in there. The hex screws are great because they are like the original 50 Fathoms. It's just that they executed them very cheaply, and I would imagine that's expensive, and that's the reason why they went the real cheap route. And they were very easy to break. I almost broke a second one, and I ended up stopped using them when I was changing them back and forth, and that is it. So now I'm using spring bars in these watches. And here's the Antarctic on a green sailcloth strap from Artham. Wow, this looks amazing. I really love the combination of the green and the white and the gray. I think it works really, really well. So I've talked about the good, I've talked about some of the bad. Now I'm going to talk about the ugly. So there is some ugly on this watch. One of the things that I found is really weird is I've put both of these watches on my time grapher, and I'll throw up video of those sessions on the time grapher. And specifically, this watch was very strange. It started out giving me a great reading of minus or plus 5 seconds per day. And after a little while, it started jumping to 9 seconds per day, and then it would jump down to -1 seconds per day, and then go to 0, and then back up to 5. It was really strange. It just kept on jumping around. The other watch, the Atlantic, did not do that. However, this watch did. So it was still in a pretty good range. It never went too high in either direction. However, it was really weird that it jumped around quite often. So it was every maybe 10 or 20 seconds, it jumped to a new number, and it didn't gradually move, it jumped. This is a movement that is somewhat notorious for being unreliable. However, I've never experienced that before with any other watch. The next thing that I think is ugly is the swatch on the side of the watch. I think it's ugly. I don't like it. I've never liked it. I don't like it where it says Blancpain on 50 Fathoms. I think it looks gross. I just never like it, and I'm sad that they put it on this watch as well, but they did, and here you are, so I do think that is ugly. So bottom line here is that you're getting a watch that's made out of bioceramic that feels like plastic. This is a way better watch than the Moon Swatch, and the Moon Swatch was very overpriced. With that being said, this is still overpriced. They did need to come up with a completely new watch in bioceramic. Even though they had the molds and the design of this watch, they had to come up with it and make a rotating bezel, make a bezel insert, the dials, the cases, all of that needed to be made from scratch. They used a System 51 because it obviously made sense, and then they came up with straps and designs for the themes of these watches. So I would imagine it does cost a lot of money to make a watch like this, but still, I think this is around a $300 watch. And there are plenty of watches out there that would kill this watch spec-wise at $300. However, they don't look like a 50 Fathoms, and that's what this has going for it. It has the Blancpain name on the logo, and that's really what you're paying for here. You can get a watch that is way better spec. However, the design is original here, technically to Blancpain. I guess that's kind of what people will go for. I own a Blancpain. I own a vintage 50 Fathoms. I wanted to get these in because obviously I think this is a big move, and I think they're really cool. So I actually personally like these watches, and I've been wearing them a lot. Price-wise, definitely a $300 watch. Definitely overpriced. It could be even less than $300. I think the whole point of this watch was to get the Blancpain name out there, make a little bit of money doing it, and it's probably working, just like it did with the Moon Swatch. Now, is this an everyday wearing watch? That is a very good question, and it's really hard to answer. And I'm going to say no. The reason why I'm going to say no is because it is made out of bioceramic. However, the movement is going to be unreliable, so you're going to eventually have problems with this movement if you wear it every single day. It can be serviced, like I mentioned before, and you could swap them out, or you can find someone who will actually service them. But in the end, it's going to break. So it's not going to be the most reliable watch that you've ever used, and of course you will eventually have issues. Bioceramic, as durable as they say it is, as scratch resistant as they say it isn't. It feels like plastic, and it behaves like plastic most of the time. So I'm not sure it would melt like plastic, but it does behave like plastic. The addition of an acrylic crystal is great. The bezel is great, and of course, the sapphire crystal caseback is great. However, all in all, I think if you wear this on a daily basis, especially the straps will fall apart because the straps have plastic hardware. You will need to change the straps like I have here with these Fathoms straps. I highly recommend changing the straps on these if you decide to wear these on a semi-regular basis. You can get them wet. They do have 91 meters of water resistance, so that is something that is a little bit better than the Moon Swatch. So if you have some watches in your rotation, this is a watch that you can keep for a very long time and wear on a semi-regular basis and eventually get service if you need it. Well, there you go. I think they're great watches. I really do, and I really love the look of these watches. They're in 42 millimeters. There's really not a 50 Fathoms that you can buy right now in 42 millimeters. I'm really enjoying these watches. I think they're really good looking and decently made for what they are. And if you want a fun watch that looks like a 50 Fathoms, and I've said this about the Moon Swatch, these are great. Yes, there are tons of watches out there that will outspec these watches, hands down, for less money. Will they be as fun? Will they be as cool as these watches? I think they're cool. That's really all I have to say. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think of these watches? What do you think of what I've had to say today? What do you think of these Fathoms straps on these watches? I think it's a game changer. Look at this. These look fantastic on here. I think it looks really good on these watches, and I think they're fun watches like I've mentioned a few times, and tell me what you think down in the comments below. I want to hear from you guys. Please also don't forget to like, subscribe if you found this video helpful or useful. I really appreciate it. Anyway, guys, thank you for logging on. I'll catch you guys in the next video.